I'll come back to why we have a little standstill in the Nocturna development. FDA replied, should we say, unfavorable to our planned launch, which should have happened in April, May this year in the US. And this is still new information, even to our senior management, so we are not quite clear on what direction to take right now because it's so brand new. So I cannot give you any directions, but I will go through history and medical background on desmopressin safety and efficacy in nocturia. Many of you have heard this before. We'll talk about objectives, stratification, efficacy on sleep and dynamics, and safety, of course. Lower urinary tract symptoms and nocturia. Lower urinary tract symptoms is often abbreviated as LUTS. It is bladder control problems are comprised of storage symptoms, which includes nocturia, and voiding symptoms. Almost all lots, nocturia is the most common. Approximately 50% of all adults, to some extent, have nocturia. Nocturia is one of, if not the most bothersome. It varies a little bit, but it definitely ranges close to incontinence and frequency. Incontinence is not always the most bothersome, whereas urgency and frequency and nocturia are very closely related. I don't think it's because it's very bothersome to get up and go to the bathroom every night, but I think it's because of the repeated sleep disruption, always being fatigued and tired. It is defined by the International Continence Society as the complaint that the individual has to wake at night one or more times to void, and each void should be preceded and followed by sleep. That's the definition. And the word sleep appears again, and this is a sentence I like very much from one of the pioneers in sleep research, Dr. Rechtschaffen from Marseille. He says that if sleep does not serve an absolutely vital function, then it's the biggest mistake that the evolutionary process ever made, because we spend approximately 30% of our time being asleep. And if that doesn't mean anything, or give us anything, then it's a big waste of time. So we need to sleep for approximately 8 hours every day. Sleep specialists still have a little bit of problems in explaining why and which part of the sleep is most important and so on. It's quite surprising that this science is lacking so much. When we started talking to sleep specialists about nocturia, some of them said that we have, not pharynx, but urologists, by addressing this, has given new thoughts to sleep experts, because this is a true common disruption in patients' ability to fall asleep, being asleep, and fall asleep again. They know very little about what it means actually to have these repeated awakenings. We come back to that we are trying in pharynx at least to help understanding some of this. Sleep is vital for health, well-being, alertness, and essential biological physiological rhythms. Fragmented sleep can impair all of these things, we know that. Nocturia is the major cause of fragmented sleep and therefore has many non-trivial consequences. I don't remember the real calculation around, but if you interrupt your sleep 2 or 3 times on one night, then the following day, if you put yourself in a car driving, it's similar to having been drinking 5 or 6 pints of beer. I mean, your alertness and your reactivity is almost the same as having drunken moderate amounts of beer. Now we're talking about beer. So all these falls and fractures and accidents that happens can very well be because of people have had a poor night's sleep. I think we all know that, but nocturia is considered as an essential symptom of BPH. We've known that. When I went to medical school 5 or 6 years ago, was it only, I think, nocturia was seen as a man's disease. And if a man above the age of 60 had nocturia, he was referred to have his prostate removed. That was what it was. But in the beginning of the 90s, there were some people thinking about this and say it's not correlated to urge or urge incontinence. It is multifactorial and could be caused by other conditions than prostate diseases. The fact that are contradicting the importance of BPH as a single factor is that existence of nocturia in women is the same as in men. And most of us here knows that women don't have a prostate. So the prostate can really not cause it. And the fact also that 30% or more of men undergoing surgery for prostatic hyperplasia or obstruction still have nocturia after the obstruction has been relieved. And removing the prostate does definitely not cure nocturnal polyuria, because the prostate does not produce water. So there was a paradigm shift in the understanding of this. Then Kirkland in 1993 started to describe that nocturnal urine production in elderly is known to be higher than in young ages. And we found a study in patients with BPH, referred for BPH and almost ending on the operating table for having their prostate removed, lacked the circadian rhythmicity in water excretion, similar to what we found in bedwetting 10 years earlier. So we started really looking at that in the mid-90s, where also Asplund in Sweden, independently of the results in Denmark and other places, said that otherwise healthy persons complaining of nocturia have a lack of increase of arginine vasopressin, similar to bedwetting. And he termed it nocturnal polyuria syndrome. This, in the mid-1990s, the Swedish authorities actually contacted Ferring because, based on Asplund's work and many other things, they've seen an increase off-label prescription of desmopressin because of these findings. So the Swedish Health FDA, or what do you call it, encouraged Ferring to do a development program in nocturia in the mid-90s because they wanted to provide guidance to physicians. We knew there was something about sodium and elderly and maybe, so they did that. And that was the time when I was invited into Ferring to help developing that, and we're still developing that. It's now 15, 16 years ago. And we all realized, even at that time, and still we do, and Johan van der Welle's lecture gave me a new thought, because we did that also in bedwetting. When we standardized for bedwetting, we called bedwetting monosymptomatic and non-monosymptomatic. And maybe we could learn something from the children here, because nocturia could be considered just the same as monosymptomatic and non-monosymptomatic. And maybe that could be a way forward. And I'll come back to why I'm saying this now when we refer to the latest FDA reactions to our findings, our studies. Nocturia can be caused by bladder outlet obstruction, detrusor overactivity, small bladder, uncompensated heart disease, untreated diabetes mellitus, estrogen deficiency, primary polydipsia, people who drink a lot, sleep disorders, and also nocturnal polyuria. This is the same as bedwetting. We have recurrent urinary tract infections, we have small bladders, we have vesicourethral reflux, we have all the same. And then we have nocturnal polyuria in bedwetting, which we today call monosymptomatic bedwetting. I would say that for the last 5 years, together with Martin, we have been doing a lot to educate the world in nocturia. And one of the things we have successfully done was that we have established a so-called think tank under the ICIRS, the International Consultation on Incontinence Research Society, that every year published recent updates in the science in this area. And the report from last year, which is now more or less 2 years ago, that Christian and I were honored to join. They're not that afraid of industry, luckily. The conclusion in that paper was that advances in diagnosis and management of nocturia were discussed among a large cross-section of international experts during this meeting. At the present time, it appears that nocturnal polyuria is the greater of the multiple treatable substrates comprising the genesis of this extremely common, bothersome, and potentially morbid condition. Here you are, Ferring. You have an antidiuretic. They didn't say that. We say so. This is a fantastic support to our whole development idea. This is nocturnal polyuria. We also here in Ferring, we are, I must say we are afraid of, but we don't like to have doctors to measure or patients to measure. Then it becomes marketing-wise difficult to handle. But we need then to find other ways that we can start treating this without necessarily measuring the urine output and correlate it to daytime and divide by 2 and multiply by 4 and beakers and bags and all over. So maybe we could say that this is patients with nocturia as the only complaint, or patients without major daytime symptoms, similar to what we've done in bedwetting. Now, is there a need for a new treatment in nocturia? We can say that for transurethral prostate resections, which was the standard treatment historically for nocturia, patients scoring more than 2 nocturia voids before and after transurethral prostate resection. Here you see the different emptying problems: voiding frequency, intermittency, urgency, weak sleep, and nocturia. 180. After the removal of the prostate, it's basically the same, right? So the rate of response is below 20% of a surgery. So surgery is definitely not the answer, for reasons mentioned before, not a big surprise. What about alpha blockers that are widely used? And I think many patients go to their doctor and say, I get up at night, and then the doctor says, oh, I don't know what to do about that, but I guess you also have some hesitancy, some urgency. Yes, I run a little faster to the toilet, and I cannot always sit during a full meeting. And, then you get an alpha blocker. And then the patient comes back and say, well, it helped a little, I'm a little dizzy, I have retrograde ejaculation, still have to get up at night. In randomized trials, the effect of anti-alpha blockers is cutting down 0.3 voids per night, not dramatically. What about OAB treatment? I mean, that's mainly maybe in women. Here we see the same net advantage versus placebo, not really impressive. So yes, there is a huge unmet need for a good treatment. Combination, OAB, BPH, again you see the same reduction in number of voids per night, not really impressive. Why does treatment of daytime symptoms often fail to improve nighttime problems? There seems to be some ideas about that. If you have OAB patients, for instance, 62 of them with nocturia have nocturnal polyuria. And if we have patients with nocturnal polyuria, they have significant reduction in their nocturia. Sorry, the other way around. Delete that. Patients with nocturnal polyuria treated for with OAB medication don't have any effect. If you don't have nocturnal polyuria, then you have significant difference in nocturia treatment. That is, if you have a bladder disease that drives your nocturia, OAB medication might work. If you have a bladder disease and no nocturnal polyuria, OAB medication does not work. Here. Is that clear? Did I confuse it? I'm sorry, it can be difficult. So what is nocturnal polyuria? Nocturnal polyuria is the major cause of nocturia. We know that for all of our trials. From the very beginning, the Noctopus, the nocturnal polyuria syndrome trials, where we had nocturnal polyuria as an inclusion criteria, we didn't have any problems in identifying these patients because 90% of all patients referred for nocturia into our trial had nocturnal polyuria. Some of them also had daytime symptoms and so on, were excluded. But nocturnal polyuria, as Kirkland demonstrated in 1993, with increasing age, we get more and more nocturnal polyuria, or less and less circadian rhythmicity in our urine production. Basically, as Johan said, because we are not designed as human beings to become much more than 38 to 40 years of age. The rest is clearly bonus. Nocturnal polyuria is defined as an abnormally large volume of urine during sleep. Don't look at the young, because that's a little bit irrelevant now, but make an arithmetic or calculation. If we sleep for 8 hours, we have 24 hours in one day, right? If we sleep for 8 hours, then we sleep 30% of our time. Think about that. Let's say 80% of all patients excrete more than 30%. They have nocturnal polyuria. They excrete more than 30% during the 8 hours they are sleeping. Is that complicated? Yes, in many ways it is, because, or not complicated, but that means that patients with nocturia, as opposed to what nature has taught us, are increasing the urine production in the 8 hours compared to the rest of the day if we excrete more than 30%. Did you get that? That's something that is biologically totally irrelevant of the body. The body is doing something completely wrong. So nocturia patients are not just producing a lot of urine, they are increasing the urine production during sleep instead of reducing it. So it's more than just the 30%. I think that calculation is a little bit interesting. The body does something that is unlogical. Nocturnal polyuria, as I said, is very common. These are studies done around the world in different drugs or different epidemiological studies. And it's reported to patients to have nocturnal polyuria in a European, in a Japanese trial, and in a US trial. It's 75 to 80 to 90% patients with nocturia who have nocturnal polyuria. That's the reason that all the other drugs that doesn't have an antidiuretic effect don't work on this. Desmopressin is the only treatment capable of addressing nocturnal polyuria and reducing nocturnal urinary output. Nocturia patients treated with desmopressin experience significant reduction in nighttime voiding and a prolongation of the first undisturbed sleep period, which is probably why people like this treatment. They get a better sleep. Mean number of voids is reduced to less than 2 in the majority of patients. I'll come back to why less than 2 is important. Less than 2 means 1. You can't have 1.5 void. So if you're below 2, you must have 1. Desmopressin is well tolerated, both short and long term. Quality of life, work productivity improve. And also we have shown cost effectiveness of this treatment. We've also managed to obtain very good recommendations from both ICI, EAU, and Japanese Urological Association. Grade A recommendation by ICI, level 1 evidence, highest scores, highest range. EAU, grade A recommendation, only level 1B evidence because of lack of comparative studies. I don't understand why that is, but never mind, still level 1. Japanese Urological Association, NICO, is here. We need to improve that. We have level 1 evidence in Japan for the treatment, but they are not recommending it because it's not approved in Japan, and Japanese urologists are very obedient towards the agency, so they will not approve it because they will not recommend it because it's not approved, but they are giving it a very high scientific level of evidence. Nocturia indication in Pharing is approved in more than 80 countries around the world. Minurin melt is approved in 65 on bioequivalence data. More than 17 million now. I think it's more now. Is the tender here? No. It's much more. We have a very good safety profile of the melt formulation. Very good. better than the tablet. I just heard a new review he made. We have an NDA still in review in the US. I'll come back to that. With the label that we are applying for 25 in women and 50 micrograms in men, and allowing us now to treat all age groups, not with the age limitation we currently have with the tablet and the melt. We'll come back to why that is later. So the cornerstones in Ferring's nocturia program is Noctopus, Nocturna, pivotal, phase 2 trials, confirmatory 40 and 41. In the two later study series are done in the US. The Noctopus, an abbreviation for nocturnal polyuria syndrome, a nickname that has survived. The primary objective was to show the number of patients who have more than 50% reduction of mean number of voids per night. Secondary objectives were the number of voids per night, number of hours from bedtime, nocturnal diuresis, ratio of nighttime urine volume, blah, blah, patient's bother, and of course, safety. This was the beginning of the big, phase 3 trials in Ferring. We still had problems in designing it because we never really, to be quite honest, we never did a state-of-the-art dose-finding study in this indication. We just took it that since we could use desmopressin safely in children, then we could basically probably use the same dose ranges in adults with nocturia. We included patients surprisingly down to 20 years of age for nocturia, up to more than 90. Caucasians mainly, principally. What was surprising was that the nocturnal urine volume was quite high in these patients, even despite that we asked for nocturnal polyuria. But what was surprising was that the bladder capacities were quite normal. So if you have a bladder capacity around 400 mils, that's considered quite normal. But if you have a nighttime urine production of 800 mils, that means you have to get up a couple of times. So that makes a very good correlation. One thing that surprised us, and it still does, especially maybe to the marketing people, that not so much Martin, because he knows it now, but it was quite surprising. We didn't make any efforts to include younger people or elderly people. We thought that we will have a lot of elderly people, meaning patients above 65. But by spontaneous recruiting these 300-400 patients into the Noctopus trials, it turned out that 2/3 of the patients were below 65 years of age. Probably, we don't know that, but probably because younger patients are more bothered and more help-seeking than elderly. We still really don't know if that is the case, but it's quite surprising that such a huge amount of patients are below 65 of the help-seeking. So don't come and tell me that it's a problem that we don't have this indication in the elderly. It seems that the market should be big enough in the younger. Nocturnal polyuria was seen in 80% of these patients. Not by the inclusion criteria, but all patients coming in. Here are the results of the efficacy, defined as patients with more than 50% reduction compared to placebo. The males, 34%, against very few placebo. 46, women respond better. And in the mixed Noctopus 4 trial, it was 33% better. So all significant, highly significant on efficacy in terms of number of voids. And what happens with the undisturbed sleep period from a baseline, a little more than 2 hours undisturbed sleep before the first wake up, it increased to 275, close to 300 minutes, 5 hours of undisturbed sleep. No sleep medication can deliver that. I tell you, no sleep medication can deliver that. And not unexpected, but a relapse after withdrawal. This is not a cure, this is like bedwetting. So, efficacy, very good. We also knew we had a concern with hyponatremia, because there had been reports on off-label use and hyponatremia. We just did not know when, why, who, all these things. We just knew it happened. So we tried to find that out. 5% of these patients in the Noctopus trials, they developed significant hyponatremia, defined as serum sodium below 130. They also had nocturia and more nocturnal polyuria, but poor or little effect of desmopressin, who have poor effect and little effect of desmopressin, and who had the safety concerns, when and why. Try to answer that now. You've seen this before, maybe. It's a very important thing for the coming lectures as well. You can't see all of the circles here, unfortunately. There are some circles, but this is very illustrative. These are the triangles are females and the circles are the males. Basically what you see here is that hyponatremia, that is defined as serum sodium below 130, happens basically only in high age, right? And what you can't see is that there are some males here, but not very many, right here. It's more severe in females. That's the take-home message. Patients are older. 95% are above 65. They had a tendency to a lower creatinine clearance and impaired kidney function. They had a higher total urine production. They had most nocturnal polyuria, and they have a lower baseline serum sodium. Those were the characteristics. The ones that is easy to detect is the 65 years of age. This led to the label limitation. Don't initiate treatment in patients above 65, because that will capture all hyponatremias. That still exists. Then we come to the Nocturna. Any questions to Noctopus? So this is the dose range from 100 microgram to 400 microgram tablets. 60 melt to 240 melt. In below 65 years of age. This is the dose range from the tablet. And here we see the Nocturna dose ranges. Because the tablet is indicated from 200 to 600 in children with bedwetting. So we added one dose strength to the Nocturia trials, way down. Maybe we should have gone even further down, because that was what we did in the MELT trials. We went down to 10, 25, 50, and then 100. Remember, 60 is the equivalent of 100. So by this means, we now have two sets of studies with exposure of desmopressin, with an overlap in this area. So now, with the Nocturna studies and the tablet study, we have a pretty good full exposure. And you will hear more about that when Christian presents, because we actually, in this company, have a database of more than 2,000 patients on different exposures, gender, nocturia, polyuria, all these things. An extremely valuable database for designing, hopefully, the right clinical picture. The question to this would be, would a lower exposure lead to an acceptable efficacy and at the same time minimize safety? We had an idea that it was high dose that was related, but since it was also elderly, and only a very small sub-portion of elderly suffering from hyponatremia, we still didn't have the real solution. We didn't know if it was dose. So the question is, did we jeopardize the efficacy by going down and get a good safety but no efficacy? So we did, again, a new study on these dosages against placebo for 4 weeks, and then we switched patients into 3 active dosages. Then we switched the placebo and the 10 microgram into a long-term study, because we found out that the 10 microgram was inefficient. So that's the design behind this. Again, interesting, mean age 62 years of age. Here we stratified for age. And again, it was a problem to recruit elderly. The younger people, they came in very quickly. BMI was a little bit high. It was a US study. It's not a little bit high, it's actually very high. Comparable across all treatment groups. Pretty severe, more than 3 voids per night in almost half of the patients, which is good. And again, nocturnal polyuria was present in the vast majority of patients, regardless if they had overactive beta or BPH. That was allowed in this trial. So again, it fits very good the picture, very nicely the picture. What we did also was, again, because we really lacked the good phase 2 trial, so we needed to measure the urine and get the pharmacodynamic consequences of having nocturia and treating with desmopressin. That the pharmacodynamic means what is the dynamic consequence of giving desmopressin in these different dosages. And what a beautiful dose response you see. On the placebo, we reduced the nighttime urine production with 100 mils. I bet that this will not continue if we have treated for a longer period. Never mind. 10 micrograms, 25, 50, 100. That is the reduction of the nighttime urine production. This is what the drug does. How does that influence then the number of voids? And that you see here. Placebo, 25, 50, 100. Right? Only 50 micrograms and 100 micrograms were statistically significant on day 28 after 4 weeks of treatment. Because of a somewhat surprising high placebo response that we didn't recognize from earlier. So only the 2 high dosages did it. And then we did a sub-analysis of men and women because we still had the same safety problems as we had with the tablets. So the dosages that gave us an acceptable efficacy still had an unacceptable safety. Nothing new under the sun. But then we started to look at genders because we knew that women were more sensitive to adverse events. Could they then also be more sensitive on efficacy? And yes, significant on all 3 dosages, whereas men only did on 100. This is the beginning of a long, long lecture that Christian will give you later. The gender difference. The gender difference. Low dose and gender-specific doses were solutions to the safety problem in desmopressin for nocturia. The increase in sleep, again beautifully illustrated. Not as dramatic as the Noctopus, but still 1.5 hours or even more on different doses. But something also very characteristic is that even if you double the dose, you don't really get an increase. So the good dose is probably down here somewhere, where you get almost 1.5 hours increased sleep time in this trial. What about long-term studies? You always like to know that, and this is just to show you how the efficacy improves over time when you continue on desmopressin, where you have a reduction of 1.18 number of voids after 28 days. It increases to close to 2 voids if you continue treatment for a year. Same tendency we've seen in bedwetting. Michael?
Did you also measure compliance?
These are the patients that are, it's the same patients, so it's the same patients that are here. So these are all, it's not just the good responders. That's a good question. Same with undisturbed sleep period. It increases over time. Adverse events leading to withdrawal is maybe, or serious adverse events, nothing really dramatic here. On placebo, same. But leading to withdrawal, we see a tendency on the higher dosages, and these will be, as you see, the hyponatremias later, and severe adverse events. It's nothing really dramatic. Those who get it. It's only the withdrawal adverse events. Hyponatremia is what we are looking for. On placebo, we had 2%, 1, 1, 5, 7. So again, dose dependent on hyponatremia, nothing surprising. Unfortunately, we actively asked for, do you have dry mouth? And since this was a study done in US, done in centers where they have a lot of these research activities going on, people are usually on trials for OAB medications that they know give dry mouth. This is my explanation of the data. I'm not saying it's the right one. So they just tick the dry mouth. It's the first study ever done with desmopressin where dry mouth is reported as an adverse event. But on the other hand, we know that a substantial proportion of patients with nocturia complain of dry mouth from time to time. So maybe it's a disease-specific and not a drug-related. However, it is there now as an adverse event. Pity. This is just another way of illustrating the efficacy data against the safety data. Look at the green boxes. We had FDA increase our demands. We had to meet two co-primary endpoints, not one as in many other trials, but two. They should both be met: reduction in number of voids and the responder rate, the number of patients who respond with 30% or more, 33% or more reduction in number of voids. 100 micrograms made it on both endpoints, tick. But unfortunately, the red boxes here are 21 patients out of 146 developed severe hyponatremia or clinical relevant hyponatremia, no go. So that was why it was initially considered failed study until we did the gender specification. Females, as you can see here, 25 micrograms, green all the way up and down. And males, 100 micrograms only, still with some unacceptable safety. When Christian came into the picture and did a lot of modeling together with our pharmacokineticists, and here we described really for the first time not only the clinical but the pharmacodynamic in a very advanced model, that females reduce their urine volume maximally at 25 micrograms. If we add more, you'll not increase more, you'll just add the time. For males to reach the same reduction in urine production, you need to use around 60 micrograms. That is the proof of the gender difference. Some other studies, Christian will come back to this, I won't. But this was dramatic. We never really knew why was it females that were suffering from so severe hyponatremia. We saw it in males, but not that severe. This is the explanation. We have overdosed females. Why only in the old age? That we still don't know, but maybe there is something with sensitivity with increasing age or whatever. We still don't know that. So this made us to make the so-called therapeutic index in women, where we have an effective dose in the green area, around 25. And here we enter the red area. And for males, you see a shift to the right in the green area and the red area. Not only did we do that, because at the same time Ferring decided to run a separate program in Japan for nocturia. And for the first time, we did a real phase 2 trial. Those of you who have been in Ferring for long enough will remember the CS06 trial, which was a dose finding in melt for bedwetting. We did the same model here. We water-loaded adult patients with nocturia, so they got a high urine production, and we gave them different dosages of melt, and we measured for how long time did they stay on an antidiuretic and when was the effect of the drug gone again. Because only by securing an antidiuresis-free window before you take the next melt can you count on having a safe drug. So if you retain water, you need to have a period before you take your next tablet where you can excrete this water in order to avoid fluid retention and develop hyponatremia. We only need an antidiuretic activity for 4 to 5 hours to treating nocturia sufficiently. And probably we have had a much longer duration of action on the others. This is the confirmation in Japanese patients on PK/PD, the dynamics. And what you see here is that on 25 micrograms in women, you reach the same level of antidiuresis as you do with around 50 micrograms in males. So this is the real confirmation of the gender difference in this trial. And we are going on with that in Japan, and it's very convincing based on these trials. So in CS29 and 31, 90% of patients with nocturia had nocturnal polyuria. Hooray, we have an antidiuretic. Very good. Desmopressin ODT effectively reduces nocturnal diuresis, number of nighttime voids, prolonged initial period of undisturbed sleep. Effect was rapid, clinically relevant and durable, clear dose-response relationship, clear gender difference, 25 microgram in women, 100 microgram in men. But based on the modeling, we changed that later to around 50.
The slide before, what is your explanation for the large error bar in females?
Do you dare to answer that question? I think it's the variability of a peptide that is shown here. 50% of the patients are in here. And yes, you're right, there is a variability. That's why we are still having, what is the duration of action? It's 2.5 hours, but still, we are still far within, there are still 14 hours left from a safety profile. But this is the variability of desmopressin that you see here. It's not become less variable by going down in dose, for sure. But it's still very potent. So, and the clinical efficacy is what we are testing. And we also tested that in this trial, and it was highly significant. Already in this low number in phase 2, we were so happy to see that we basically had the results, but we could not convince that we had enough patients.
Yeah,
so this dynamic effect is really enough to show a clinical relevant effect, even in a small number of patients.
Sure, I totally agree with the great results. I just wondered about...
Yeah, no, but there is a variability on desmopressin. That's the best explanation.
Yeah. Or could it be weight?
No, it's not related to body weight.
So that was evenly distributed over the subgroups?
We have to say so. But okay. Christian will maybe come back to that later. Yeah. Well tolerated, adverse drug reactions differentiating active treatment from placebo. Serum sodium was age and dose related. No serum sodium below 125 of the severe ones in the female dose. 1 year data raised no concerns. We went to FDA with this, and we knew we had a failure because those that showed efficacy had an unfavorable safety. They really, really liked our data mining. They really liked the gender difference because they have been asking for that. They ask always for gender and age differences. So they said, this is good, this is top of the pops, but unfortunately, dear Fering, this is a post-hoc analysis. And we don't approve based on post-hoc analysis. We want you to go home and do a confirmatory trial in your decided dosages, in an acceptable length, and with an acceptable in- and exclusion criteria. So we decided on doing that, and then we went to FDA also with the special protocol assessment. They reviewed all our protocols, accepted the endpoints, the numbers, the power, everything. Everybody was happy. And we went out and did the Nocturna CS40 and 41 studies. So the confirmatory trials are here. These are the results of CS40 and 41. This is 25 microgram in women against placebo. So we find the usual reduction of a little more than 1 void, 1.2 voids per night, which is what we know historically. But unfortunately, placebo was almost just as effective. Statistically significant. We took the risk, we believed in our modeling, and we said a dose between 50 and 75 in males would do it. And luckily, we found that 50 and 75 microgram effect-wise did exactly the same. which it should, based on our modeling data. So it confirms that we know our data, we know our product. 50 micrograms had only 2 adverse events in males of low serum sodium. But again, a high placebo response. Not as high as in the females. Did I say something about females? No. But the placebo response in females is high. Just kidding. The secondary endpoint in responder analysis was also statistically significant. Again, I think we can control the hyponatremia. There were 2 males who developed serum sodium down to 125. They did it pretty quickly. And the good thing, this man was, I think, 75 years, and this was 79 years old. Had a pretty low baseline serum sodium. So maybe we can, but we proposed to FDA still to monitor the males and no monitoring in females. 3 females developed hyponatremia, serum sodium below 130. 2 of them were unfortunately protocol violators. They had a low baseline serum sodium, and as such should have not been included in the trial, and will not be. Based on the monitoring program, only 1 drop below, but normalized during continued treatment. So my thinking is, and our thinking is, that we don't really have a hyponatremia problem in females. So I still strongly believe that we have solved the hyponatremia. It's not nearly as common or frequent as seen before. So for FDA, unfortunately, we need more data, especially the benefit-risk balance. They seem not really to understand it. Are we surprised? Yes, we are, because special protocol assessment, they agreed, they followed it, we filed in time, they evaluated it, we discussed with the study endpoints and label division of SEALD, the quality of life. Everything went into the label, we negotiated the label, we discussed the tables in the label, we discussed the color of the packaging in the Nocturna package, the brand. The day before the so-called PDUFA day, we had a meeting with FDA agreeing on a post-approval safety program. They wanted us to follow elderly for so and so long, and everybody were happy. And they said that tomorrow you'll get the final signatures. And so we were preparing. Champagne was ordered. And then we got a letter saying that they didn't believe in our benefit-risk ratio and they needed more discussions with us. That was quite a disappointment. And I still think it was last week only, so I apologize that I not, on behalf of senior management today, can tell you precisely what the way forward is. Bottom line is, Ferring is still active in nocturia. We don't give up. Novo Nordisk got a similar rejection yesterday on one of their big insulin products. FDA are raising their bars. No question about it. The first step is that we need to have an end of meeting or a type A meeting with FDA, trying to understand and express our viewpoint on this. I think they misunderstood some things. Maybe we didn't explain ourselves enough. But basically, what is the impact of treating nocturia and what is a relevant outcome measure? Number of voids, reducing with 0.2 voids per night is not enough. I can buy that, because we also said that the OAB medication does the same, it doesn't work. So we cannot really go there. But we had a statistical significant study. And what is a relevant clinical outcome? Is it the sleep? Is it the quality of life? We have loads of material on that. Maybe we need to demonstrate it for them in another way. Bottom line is also they still believe we have a hyponatremia problem, because they still find nocturia somewhat trivial. Not cosmetic, but against the 2 hyponatremias we had, they fear a little to let it loose on the market, to be quite honest. Reasons that I don't understand, and maybe we haven't, again, given the well-told story about the hyponatremia, which I think is very, very good otherwise. So bear with us for another few months, and then maybe we can celebrate. Maybe we will get a label restrictions in the beginning and an agreement on doing more in elderly. I don't know. We're still discussing in the project team, and Martin is on board, and Tine Kold Olsen. We have a global project team, and we hope that it will be a global assignment to link it also to European files and what to do, because this opportunity for pairing is by far the biggest we have ever had.